Gaining freedom from health debt is really what this podcast and greatmed.org is all about. Putting power in your hands to improve your God-given ability to be healthy. Many people with preventable disease want to make lifestyle changes. They want to improve or reverse disease, but they don't know how. Walk, Don't Run to the Doctor is the resource hub that is a cure for a common confusion about healthy living. Well, thanks for coming back to Walk, Don't Run to the Doctor. I'm Miles Hassell, MD. I'm an internal medicine doctor in Portland, Oregon, and I'm speaking to Mac Lake, a pastor in South Carolina, and he's not just a pastor, he's also an author. He's founder of the Multiply Group, and they do different things related to church development, leadership, and growth. And so it's a really pleasure to have you on board, Mac. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and why in the world a doctor is talking to a pastor about health.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be on, Miles. And health is a part of my story because when I was 40 years old, I had started a church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I was 3 years into that church plant. And in those 3 years, I was working hard. I was highly stressed. I was, working nonstop, trying to get a brand new church started up and going, and started gaining a lot of weight, started feeling bad. And, I said I would come home from a long day of work. I would lay on the couch. I had three little kids, and they'd want to play when I get home. And I'd lay on the couch and I'd grab a ball and throw a ball and say, go get the ball, play fetch with my kids. Or I'd say, hey, you know what? Let's play hide and seek. Daddy's going to hide and y'all have to come find me. And I would hide in a really good spot and try to get a little 10-minute nap in. And so I knew something had to change. And I looked at my wife and I said, I've done diets before. I don't want to do a diet. I want to change my lifestyle. I'm sick of this fad stuff and, that sort of thing. I just want a lifestyle. And at that point, I found the book Body for Life by Bill Phillips. And it was sort of a balanced approach, and of eating and exercise. And so that's the way I started. And it just became a hobby. It became a habit. It became something that I loved. And, but I knew something had to change. And then within a year, I just, less than a year, I dramatically felt different and looked different. I lost a lot of weight. And I remember I told my wife, I said, I'm going to do this for 1 year, make sure it's a discipline in my life, and then I'm going to preach a sermon series on health in front of everybody because I see what's happening in our nation and how unhealthy our nation is. And this is good news, that I feel so much better. I want to share with other people that how to steward our bodies.
So you were, as a pastor, you were seeing this as just good stewardship.
Oh, yeah.
Can you enlarge on that as both for the person, their family, society? Do you feel like fleshing that out at all?
I remember there was a pivotal moment for us right after that that shaped us significantly. Cindy went on a cruise with her grandmama, and it was an old person cruise. And so I remember I drove over to the port to pick her up, and she came off the cruise boat with her grandmama, and she was crying. And so I was like, "What's wrong?" And she just shook her head no.
What a great cruise.
Yeah, great cruise. I'm like, "What is going on?" And I could tell she was very upset. She said, "I'll tell you later." We drive grandmama home, drop her off. And Cindy looked at me and she said, Mac, there were two types of people on that boat. There were couples who were dancing and, having the best time of their life, in their 70s, 80s, 90s. And then there were people who were 70s, 80s, 90s, and they were on walkers. They were sitting in wheelchairs. They looked terrible. She said, I got a vision of our future. And I want to be this couple that's dancing and having fun, not the other couple. And we came up with a phrase that we want to die young at an old age. She even made me a t-shirt, die young at an old age. And it's so important because a lot of times we are eating and thinking and moving for today. Who am I today? Instead of saying, what I say now is, I'm eating and moving and thinking for 90-year-old Mac, And I'm 64 today, not for 64-year-old Mac. Back then I was 40. And so I want to make choices that 90-year-old Mac will turn around, look, and go, wow, thank you for making that decision because I feel better. I can move better. I can think better. I've got greater clarity. And what I'm seeing happening as I go across the country, work with so many different churches and businesses, I'm watching, Miles, it's crazy. I'm watching young leaders who can't sit through a 3-hour workshop without, almost falling asleep, low energy levels, inability to focus, older leaders too, but I'm seeing this impacting young leaders. They can't focus, brain fog, they're overweight in a very unhealthy way. And I'm seeing this, and it has a drastic impact on their home life as well as the calling that God has on their life. And so, in Exodus chapter 18, it's funny. You don't think about Exodus 18 being a health verse. You don't hear many people using that verse for health. But in Exodus 18, Moses was leading the Hebrew people out of slavery, out of Egypt, about 1 million people. And Jethro, his father-in-law, approached him one day and said, Moses, you're killing yourself. You are stressed out. You are meeting with people nonstop. You're overworked. You are burning yourself out. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to put these people in groups of thousands, hundreds, fifties, tens, whatever it was. I want you to put a structure together and start leading through people. And so Moses did that. Now, here's what's fascinating. That was in Exodus 18. Now, fast forward 40 years later, Deuteronomy chapter 34. I love this verse. It's one of my life verses. Moses was 120 years old, and his eyes were not weak, and his strength was not gone. Now, here's the key to that passage. If Moses had ignored Jethro's advice 40 years earlier and said, nope, I'm going to keep doing it all myself. I'm going to be a workaholic. I'm going to take on the stress. I'm going to take on the pressure.
Because I'm really important.
Yeah, I'm really important. Yeah. 40 years later, it would have said Moses was 120 years old when he died because God is in charge of our lifespan. We are in charge of our health span. And there are other factors, but we are greatly responsible for our health span. So I believe Deuteronomy 34:7 would say Moses was 120 years old when he died, but he had high blood pressure, diabetes, arthritis, and dementia.
And depression.
And depression, yeah. But he learned to lead in a healthy way, to manage himself. I wrote a book called Leading Yourself because I'm seeing so many people who don't know how to lead themselves. And health is one of the chapters in that book. And so we've got to learn to lead ourselves well, because when we don't, we're putting undue stress on us that diminishes our health and diminishes the kingdom impact that God's called us to make. So that's why this conversation is so important.
Because if we're not exploring good health choices, we're not going to be the same asset to our family, to other people. If you're in a walker and requiring oxygen, you're probably not going to be able to help somebody else very much. You're going to be more of a burden. Now, God's in charge, and some of us are going to be a burden because of something that was outside of our control. But what we don't want to do is create a burden on others that is in our control, because we haven't used, and we'll get onto this in a second, I imagine, self-discipline. And so I completely agree that, and to me, it's also a bit of a testimony issue. If people who believe in that they've got this God-given designed body aren't taking care of that body, when we're told in at least two places that our body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, then why are we not taking care of that? Why are we being sloppy? And in so doing, being a bad example to our spouses, being a bad example to our parents, being a bad example to our kids. One of my pet peeves is parents who say, "Yeah, my children eat a lot of junk food," and I'm saying, "Well, who brings it home?" And well, they really insist on it. And I said, "Well, if they insist on pornography, would you bring that home? I mean, is food porn any better?" And so that's And at which point they go find a different doctor. So I can see we're in agreement on all that. The other aspect, tell me how this all relates to what I would call the polypharmacy idea, that people look first to medications, not first to their choices. Can you comment on that at all?
For me, it's difficult because I was influenced, 20 years ago by this simple little phrase. And you've got a book that talks about this phrase, that food is medicine. And when I heard that, it clicked for me. I was like, that makes sense. If God designed our bodies, if God designed our internal organs and how they function, and then God provided foods to put into this body, then it makes sense that that food would help us remain healthy and heal us when we're not healthy.
Hmm.
And when I began to experience, I got on my health journey and I was doing good, but I was still experiencing some issues. And so the health journey is a long journey of learning. There's always something new to learn. That's when I began to discover about oils. And I was like, oh, I didn't know. We used the cheapest oil we could find and cook with it. And so then I began to find out that, oh, wait a minute, some of the things in those oils, and I'm not a doctor, I can't explain all this really well, but the way I put it is you put these things in your body's designed to receive certain foods. All of a sudden, it gets this thing that's not a food in your body, and your body's like, hey, I wasn't designed to handle this. I'm not sure what to do with it. So it goes around your blood system and wreaks havoc. And now all of a sudden, inflammation is attacking this foreign body, and you're getting different symptoms because you're putting something in your body that's not designed to be digested this way. That's the way I understood it. And I was like, that makes sense to me. So why wouldn't I, instead of running the medication, why wouldn't I run first to food and adjust the way I'm eating and see what difference that would make instead of just trying to mask the symptoms with some sort of medication?
I think that's exactly right. The oils thing is interesting because so many people are sold a bill of goods on modern oils, not realizing that these oils never existed before. Humans never ate these highly refined, clear, tasteless oils that we see now, and in many of them, they didn't even exist up until recent decades. So, I think you could say that things like safflower oil, avocado oil, grapeseed oil, none of these actually even existed, canola oil, or they existed only in a toxic and a really unpleasant tasting form. So obviously they weren't used. And so that leads us to one of the principles we use a lot, and that is what we call the pioneer woman test. If a pioneer woman from, say, 1880 wouldn't recognize a food, don't touch it. And so what did they have back then, depending on where you were geographically? You had butter, you had olive oil, you had a few other nut oils that would have been kind of exotic because they're hard to make, like walnut oil and sunflower seed oil and things like that, in their crude forms, which are not clear, they're not tasteless, they've got a lot of flavor. They're actually, like walnut oil is really good, but they didn't have they didn't have these highly processed, industrially processed, clear, tasteless oils that really gum up your metabolism. And so I completely agree. Along the same lines would be refined carbohydrates, sugars, white flour, white rice, which largely only showed up, I would submit, somewhere in the late 1800s. And so for the vast bulk of human existence, then these weren't available. So I think you mentioned sugar was a big part of your decision making, and I imagine white flour might have been too.
It was. I began to cut those things out, and again begin to see a massive, massive difference in the way I felt. And I didn't recognize the danger of some of those things. Miles, before I made the big change, my typical day of eating is I would wake up in the morning and I would eat Life cereal, but I would take 4 spoonfuls of sugar and put it on that Life cereal. And then I'd go eat lunch at McDonald's or Burger King and drink a Mountain Dew. And I would probably drink 3 Mountain Dews in a day. And then I would have snacks in the day, Twinkies or something, and then eat dinner, whatever Cindy would cook. And then every night you sit down and eat ice cream with fudge on it, right? And so I was doing that, and it was just wreaking havoc with my health. I was enjoying it, but it was wreaking havoc on my health. And so after I made the adjustment, I told you I was going to preach a sermon series. Well, one of the sermons I did was on food. And so I mentioned this diet. I said, now a year ago, this is the way I used to eat. And I had it all in a grocery bag, and I pulled out a grocery bag one at a time, and I showed them what I was eating. And then I had the McDonald's bag and the Mountain Dews and all that. And I was explaining to them what I was eating. And then I reached in the bag and I pulled out a jar of sugar, and it was this big. And I said, this is how much sugar I was eating like in a week. And let me tell you what that's doing to your body. Now, here's the other thing I've learned too. If I'm right on this, I read Dr. Puttermeyer's work on, I think it was his book, Brain Grain or Grain Brain or something like that, and where he talks about the impact of sugar on your neurological aspect of your health. And that frightened me when I read that. My mom, she is 92 years old, and but unfortunately, mom is in a home, and she has Alzheimer's. And I go up to visit her in Aiken, South Carolina, but she doesn't know who I am. And for about 15 years, mom has had Alzheimer's. And and so it just breaks my heart that mom's lifespan continues, but her health span ended 15 years ago. And it breaks my heart. And so and I don't know if sugar is what caused that in her, I don't know any of that, but to watch her in that condition for 15 years, you know what? There is no sweet treat that is good enough to make me tempted enough, because I'm like, I got to stay away from this stuff because it is dangerous to your mental health. And you know what happens? And this, this really bothers me, and we're probably going to get to this anyway. But at churches, what we see is we're seeing across our nation a rise of mental health issues, and then hopefully people will turn to the church. But here's what happened. They go into church and they sit down, and we're giving them donuts, sugary donuts, and we're giving them pizza, and it's like they have this mental health issue. Yes, it's spiritual. Yes, it's emotional, but it's also physical. And so we take sugar and we're pouring it on top. It's like pouring gasoline on a fire. And I think churches just don't recognize, hey, these people are coming in with high anxiety, with depression, and we are fueling that fire. We're telling them Jesus loves you, that you are accepted, and God has grace for you, and He will unconditionally love you. He wants to be a father to you. And we preach this incredible gospel message that they go, yes, I love that. But at the same time, we're pouring fuel on their anxiety. So it makes there's a tension there.
Oh, yeah. And, I think you've addressed several interesting issues. One is the whole aspect of cognitive dysfunction, everything ranging from depression, anxiety to dementia. And there's a reason why in many circles, dementia is called type 3 diabetes and the influence of lack of physical exercise, too much waistline, and too much refined carbohydrates. And I would take sugar that you've highlighted, but I'd also look at breakfast cereals and white rice and white bread as all in that same category. And people just don't realize. But if they do what you talked about and said, what kind of life do I want to have at 90? And we sometimes suggest they go down to the lobby of the hospital where I practice and just sit in the lobby for 5 minutes and watch some of those people, just like your wife did on the cruise. Watch some of those people walk across. And do you want to be that 85-year-old who looks like he's probably dressed in tennis clothes, with a straight back and a alert face, or do you want to be the one with the walker and the oxygen and who looks miserable? And it's, for most people, most of the time, it is their choice. And taking that choice seriously is really important. And that brings us to, I know you've talked quite a bit about the sort of the tension between self-discipline and habits. And I find it fascinating because self-discipline is one of the gifts of the fruits of the Holy Spirit. And I think in churches that maybe isn't emphasized enough, perhaps out of self-defense. I had a guy who brought a bunch of donuts to our church, and I was looking at him, and all these kids were just piling on him, right? And these are kids that happen to be tend to be chronically unwell and stuff. And so I uncharitably said to him, is there a difference between bringing those donuts and bringing cigarettes? And it didn't go over super well. Um, but I don't think I was exaggerating, but it's perceived as exaggeration because people just don't appreciate the hazards of refined carbohydrates, of which sugar and sweet drinks and juices are a big part. So I think your emphasis is absolutely correct. So tell me about how you approach self-discipline and habits, which are, I think, sort of two sides of a coin, maybe.
It is. I love that verse in Proverbs. It says, "A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls."
Yeah, and better is he that rules a spirit than one who takes a city. Yeah,
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 yeah. Love that verse. And because if we don't have self-discipline, then we're opening ourselves up to vulnerabilities that are dangerous. And so a lot of people, they'll go, man, I'm just not disciplined. I'm not disciplined. Yes, you are. You brush your teeth every day. You sit down, watch Netflix every day. There are certain things you are consistent in. So what we have to do is we have to pick a behavior. Okay, what can I grow in? Where do I want to change? And get some accountability around you and do it again, 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 and again, just one change. And what happens is you eventually jump what I call the discipline habit barrier. That discipline will become a habit to where it's automatic. It's just automatic. You wake up in the morning and you go for a 20-minute walk. It's just automatic. You eat lunch and you just automatically, oh, I got to go take a 10-minute walk. It's just automatic. And so now at first it's not, because it's like, oh, I don't want to go for a walk. I don't feel like going for a walk. Whatever the discipline is. But if you do it consistently with accountability, you can jump that discipline to habit barrier. And that's a hard thing for people to accept. I remember when I was in seminary, Dr. Howard Hendricks, he was my favorite professor. And I'm sitting, phenomenal teacher. And I remember sitting in class and he said, "Gentlemen, do you want me to teach you how to add 15 years to your ministry?" And man, I grabbed my paper and pen. I'm like, yes, tell me how to add 15 years. And he said, "Eat right and exercise every day." And I just dropped my pen and went, "Oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm 28 years old." Yeah. Oh, that's crazy. Looking back, I'm going, man, he gave me some good advice. It just took me another 12 years to to learn it.
yeah, yeah. That's and I think you've made the point before that once you get that discipline going and it turns into a habit, it no longer requires discipline. You may have already mentioned that, but I think that's critical for people to realize. And the and then the example to others too. Once again, because if you're disciplined in one area, you're probably going to be disciplined. Is alcohol your problem? Well, discipline is any kind of lustful behavior we could be talking about. It all boils down to discipline. None of this is out of your control. And I wonder how often people say, "Oh, I'm addicted to something." When in actual fact, if we said, "You know what, you're really addicted to sin, folks," let's not pretend that this is anything else. This is within your control. You just have to choose whether you're going to control it or not.
Yeah. Discipline, what I've learned is discipline is contagious. And I have seen this. So, I've been doing this for 24 years now. And in the past, 14 years, I travel a lot. And so I travel almost every week. And so when I land in whatever city I'm going to, first thing I do is I go to Whole Foods, Sprouts, farmers market, whatever I can find. And I'll buy my breakfast, lunch, and dinner for whatever. If I'm there 3 days, 2 days, whatever, I'll buy all my meals.
Give me an example of what that shopping list looks like.
Breakfast, I will get my mush oatmeal. I'll get some blueberries and walnuts, and I love mixing that up. And then I will buy my coconut milk or almond milk, and I take my little bag of powdered protein, and so I'll make a little protein shake. At lunch, it's pretty much when I'm traveling, it's going to be turkey with olives and some sort of carrots or celery or peppers, something like that. Dinner time, it's going to be typically it's like sardines or tuna fish, something like that with some sort of vegetables. And then I buy goat milk. I buy organic coffee, the cold coffee. And so in the morning, around 10 o'clock or so, I will make a goat milk latte, which is phenomenal. And so I'll drink me a goat milk latte in the morning. And then I will get the Flackers. It's a little cracker it's got a lot of protein in it, a lot of seeds in it. And I will buy goat cheese or sheep cheese, and I'll cut that up, and I'll put that on those crackers and eat that as a snack as well. So that's a lot of what, but fruits, vegetables, primarily is what I'm eating. And so I'll show up to these events, and they're serving pizza and they're serving, fast food, whatever. And I'm sitting there in my little bag eating my stuff. And so people start asking me questions. Well, I'm not there to talk about health. I'm there to talk about leadership and leadership development. And inevitably, the conversation turns to health. And so I have people all over the country who message me all the time and say, "Hey, thank you. Just sitting there at lunch with you that day, watching you that day, gave me the belief and the courage to take that next step and get myself healthy." And so, Miles, I say, I don't go in and deliberately wave my hands and try to show off and talk about it. I don't do that at all. People notice it, and the discipline inspires them. And so I decided, years ago, I want to be a walking blue zone. If you know what, I mean, you know what a blue zone is where people tend to live to be over 100 years old in a healthy way. And I said, I want to be a walking blue zone in my life. I just want to model what health looks like. I may not nail it perfectly, but I'm going to do my best I can and try to live in a healthy manner. So as people observe, it can impact their health decisions as well. And I've seen that. And I've seen it with my kids. I have three kids. And my kids, at first, they thought I was crazy, when they were younger, when they were teenagers, especially. My daughter, she would take a chocolate chip cookie and wave it under my nose and say, "Come on, Dad, eat it, eat it. I know you want it." I said, "I don't want it." And it would drive her crazy. I'd smell it real big. I'd go, most of your taste is in your nose anyway. But anyway, I would drive them crazy. All three of them now are committed to eating healthy. And I got 6 grandkids, and they are very, very healthy because we've spent the time researching and finding healthy alternatives and things that kids love. My daughter just introduced us to kefir water. She makes kefir water. Her kids love it. And so we're always sharing with each other these healthy things that we're finding. And when you have a community like that, it makes it so much easier than doing it on your own.
Oh, yeah. And let me address two things. One is highly processed foods, because it's probably an area where you and I disagree. And the second is cooking at home. But a couple of things that you actually use is stuff that we actually recommend against. So protein powders, we call them Chinese industrial chemicals. So we would actually argue that the protein powders are actually an example of the kind of food you should avoid. And that's based on a bunch of research started, I think, perhaps by the Nutrisante group in France. But they looked at ultra-processed foods, and many other groups have duplicated their research. They looked at ultra-processed foods, of which protein powders were one example, and said, how does when you look at the proportion of these foods in somebody's diet, how does it alter their outcomes? And the higher the proportion, the more cancers, the more depression, the more heart disease, the more stroke, the more dementia, the more death. And this has been reproduced in, I think, just about every major Western country. And so we actually argue that the industrial milks, like almond milk and oat milk and soy milk and so on, the industrial milks, unless you make them at home, and the protein powders are right up there with those breakfast cereals. So I don't know how you feel about that.
I like to take the position of a learner. And so I always want to be a learner. And here's one of the things I learned. When I was 40 years old, when I made the major transition, and I said, I'm going to start eating healthy and exercising, and it became a habit for me. It became a hobby for me. And so I started to learn. Now, here's the problem. I was using Bill Phillips stuff as my baseline, which was a great start for me. But then I also was buying Men's Fitness magazine and reading that. And that's where I was getting my advice from in the early years. And so, yeah, I didn't know. And so here I'm taking a lot of bad advice, not only about eating, but I'm taking bad advice about exercise and no clue. And so over the years, I continue to learn. And so my philosophy, what I eat, some of the things that I do, all of that's shaping and will continue to shape. And now with the milks and the protein powder, we find what we think is the cleanest that we can find, and so we do that. But hey, I'm always willing to learn more because again, I'm learning for 90-year-old Mac. I want to die young at an old age, and so any tip and lesson I can learn, I'm always open to learn more.
So the way Michael Pollan, I think, expressed it really well. If it came from a plant, don't eat it. If it is a plant, eat it. In other words, if it comes from an industrial plant. And so I think the evidence is really, really strong, very strong. Did I mention that it's very strong? Very strong evidence that industrially processed foods are just plain bad. So if it came from a factory, pretty much avoid it. If it has a wrapper, probably shouldn't eat it. And so we would suggest people just have like raw nuts and whole fruit, yogurt, kefir, cheese, fruit, vegetables as those snack foods rather than protein powders and industrial milks. And that comes to sort of how do we help people make good decisions? So in this case where you and I have a mild disagreement, then and so the way we approach it is we suggest that people don't do anything that doesn't have 3 lines of evidence to support it. So for example, extra virgin olive oil, you can find way more than 3 lines of evidence to support. You have randomized controlled trials that have been shown benefit. You have epidemiologic studies, observational studies that have shown benefit. You have historical precedent, which we think is really strong. That the Pioneer Woman test, if this was something that people have been doing for thousands of years, it's probably okay. And so if somebody comes along and says, as there is a prominent social media physician who says you shouldn't eat blueberries, well, you can sort of and say, where are the 3 lines of evidence to say you shouldn't eat blueberries, and where are 3 lines of evidence to say you should? Well, it's a lot easier to present the ones that say you should. And so we eat blueberries as well. But I think if we could teach our friends and family to always look for 3 lines of evidence behind anything, whether it's a medicine or a vaccine or a toenail clipper. Well, I might be exaggerating on the toenail clipper part. Then it'll make them slow down and make better decisions and build a library of good thinking. But it all takes discipline, and it has to turn into a habit. So the whole food thing is interesting because it leads to home cooking. Did your transition also mean that you spent a lot more time cooking at home?
Not at first, because again, it was a learning journey. But now, uh, we might eat in a restaurant once a month or once every 2 months. It's very rare we eat in a restaurant. I just don't trust what I'm getting. Even though there have been times we'll go out and I'll say, hey, here's how I want this prepared. Here's what I want. Please don't put this on there. And sometimes I'll get it back. I'll take one bite and I'll go, I'm not eating that. I can tell they have drenched that in oils. I can tell. And once you start staying away from it, your body can tell you pretty quick. We cook at home pretty much exclusively.
And when we think of stewardship, also cooking at home is a whole lot cheaper. Plus, we teach our kids good habits.
My clients pay for my food, and you know how much money I'm saving them by not eating out, instead going to a grocery store and buying fruits and vegetables.
I see people, for example, they say, well, I got a protein bar because I didn't have time. I said, well, you had time to get a pound of almonds and an apple, or a hard-boiled egg and some celery, or whatever. There's any number of alternatives you had, and you were just too lazy to do it. No, I don't really say the last part.
And reading the labels, because when you go in and you grab some of the trail mix or grab a bag of nuts, you still got to read the label because so many times they add sugar or they add oils to it that you just would have never known had you not looked at the label. So reading the label is a skill that I think the average person needs to learn as well.
Yeah, it needs to become that habit. And we often say, when it's only got one ingredient in the label, like raw almonds, there's not a lot on the label to read. And whereas trail mix, who knows what's in that stuff? And so getting our people to be thinking, keep it simple, keep it traditional, keep it whole food. And you're going to save a ton of money. My mother's comment, we grew up in a relatively anti-medicine household. And so even though I became a physician, it stuck with me. But one of her comments was, good food is a lot cheaper than good doctors. And I think that's pretty valuable. The issue of habitual exercise is an interesting one that we suspect is almost as important as your food choices. And we actually prescribe exercise 3 times a day, even if it's only 1 minute. And that's based primarily on metabolic studies in terms of a lot of our patients are overweight with diabetes. And 3 times a day seems to work better than once a day, even if the volume of exercise is similar. So that happens to be sort of and we suggest as wide a variety as possible, some resistance, and we prescribe games a lot. Tell me how you approach the whole exercise issue.
Yeah, so my goal is 10,000 steps a day. I love to get 10,000 steps a day. Um, I like to walk in the morning, noon, and evening. In fact, it's really interesting. I don't have it on right now, but I got one of those Stello sugar glucose monitors. I've never done that. And I'm just curious. And I was like, I want to see. And that was fascinating, fascinating to watch those numbers. And so I would eat, my sugars would go up, I would go walk, and boom, they came down. Or I would slow down my eating. And so it would gradually go up and then gradually go down. And then eating the vegetables first or the protein first, it slows down those fast carbs. And that has just been fascinating to me. But as far as exercise, I really try to walk after every meal. I lift about 3 to 4 times a week. I used to lift real heavy. I don't do that anymore because when you learn from Fitness Magazine, you're learning wrong things. I wish somebody would have taught me about mobility and flexibility 20 years ago, because now I'm having to undo some of that stiffness that my body has developed. And so I'll do resistance training 3 times a week, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, something like that. Try not to go crazy anymore. And then I'll play basketball right over here. So that gets my heart rate up. That's the other thing I've really learned. Some things just will not get my heart rate up. The row machine just does not get my heart rate up. Treadmill does not get my heart rate up. And so I have to find out where I can get my heart rate into that zone 2, zone 3. Uh, and so that's been a good learning for me because my HRV is really high. And so to get my heart rate into that zone 2, 3, my heart rate will not get in zone 2 on a walk. I have to push harder to get into zone 2. And uh, so I just been able to monitor that. And so I know for me, I have to move a lot. And when I don't, I begin to see my HRV really begins to tank. And so movement is really, really important for me in my daily routine.
What led you to the habit of 3 times a day, which I think is very supported in literature. I'm completely in agreement with it. But how did you come up with that?
Yeah, I was listening. I was listening to an old man talk about health, and he was just such. And I'm 64. Who am I to talk? But he was older than me, and he talked about the benefits of walking. And then when he talked about the benefits of how it helps level out your blood sugar, I was like, oh, that's fascinating too. And so it just made sense to me. And ancestrally, when you look back, you know what? Our ancestors would have been walking. That pioneer lady, she would have been walking all the time. In the blue zones, one of the things they've discovered is a lot of times they're walking to go get water. They're walking to go. They're one, I think it's in Italy or somewhere. They have to walk. It's very mountainous, and so they're constantly walking up and down these mountains. And so just those different things have convened together. And I'm like, you know what? Yes, I want to get 10,000 steps a day, but I don't want to get 10,000 at one time. I want to spread it out through my day. So a lot of times I'll tell my assistant, hey, when you schedule this appointment, make sure it's a phone call instead of a Zoom call so I can walk her. I got a pond out in front of my house. I walk circles around the pond on a phone call. And it's amazing how many steps you can get in just on one little phone call.
And a lot of this that you're talking about, it involves planning. You don't think of it as planning because you've already turned it into a habit. But your self-discipline made you make a plan. Your plan became a habit, and one of the other reasons we prescribe exercise 3 times a day, even if it's only 1 minute, is because nobody has an excuse not to do that. They can't wiggle out of it. And I was trained by Lynn Goldberg, an exercise physiologist, who actually completely ignored heart rate. So for the listener, there's a lot of different ways to skin this particular cat, and some people use heart rate, and some of us use shortness of breath. If you're getting short of breath 3 times a day, you're probably going to do well. And you mentioned you play basketball. And in terms of avoiding your mother's fate of Alzheimer's, I think one of the strongest aspects of exercise that seems to be beneficial in terms of avoiding dementia is playing games with other people. Ping pong, basketball, tennis, pickleball. And out of all those things, ping pong has been studied the best for some reason. I don't know why. But I bet you basketball is just as good. So, and then people have to recognize that if they're going to be active, they might get injured. And that's not, if you sprain an ankle, I just broke a finger in pickleball. It just happens. If you really don't want to have injuries, just lie down on a couch and stay there and see what your quality of life is like. And that all leads to, so 2/3 of this country in the United States, for those listening in the United States, are overweight or obese. And so we take all that you've just said, and then we're still faced with sometimes people saying, I just can't lose any weight. What do you say to those people?
Walk, don't run to the doctor.
Yeah, so our feeling about all that is if you really get rid of the sugars and refined flours, the breads, the white rice, the pasta, then it's pretty hard not to lose weight. And then the other trick we do is what we call the 6-apple challenge. And if you claim to be somebody who can't lose weight, if you have at least one piece of fruit or one piece of vegetable like a celery stalk or something like that before every single meal and snack, before you put anything else in your mouth, you're going to eat less. And if you don't lose 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds, we have a podcast on this called Make Your Own Ozempic. Then if you don't lose 1.5 pounds a week by being disciplined doing that, but it takes discipline. You've got to plan ahead. You've got to have those apples and bananas and celery, stalks of celery in front of you in order to be just like you do when you come to a new city. You've planned ahead. You know what kind of place you're going to be looking for. You know what kind of food you're going to get. And it's kind of interesting how you've developed these habits that if we could inject this into society, the improvement in quality of life and the destruction of my career would be substantial because who would need me? So we'll just keep it a secret.
We buy a big bag of carrots and a big bag of celery, and it's in the very bottom drawer of our refrigerator. And while I'm making breakfast, I eat a carrot.
Do you peel it first?
No, the dirtier the better is what I tell Cindy.
The best probiotic foods are whole foods. So kefir and yogurt and cheeses and things like that are great. I'm not dismissing those, but I think people often fail to recognize that any raw whole food is dirty. Dirty foods are probiotic. And so that carrot that you just ate actually is helping your microbiome.
I didn't know this, but when I was, I just learned this a couple of years ago. So when I would travel, I'd go to Whole Foods and I would get the bag of baby carrots thinking, oh, this is good. Well, somebody told me a couple of years ago, no, they bleach those things and they're just sucking all the nutrients out of them. So now when I go, I buy the carrots that have the stalks on them and they got dirt all over.
No, and I think your gut is better for that. Let's go back to waistlines a little bit. If we're going to help people lose weight, which is a huge driver of disease, how do we wrap all the stuff that you and I have just talked about and convince people they really can do it? Do you have a sense of that?
Anytime you want to, so many people look at the health journey like it's a mountain that's impossible to climb. I will never be able to climb that. I'm not disciplined enough. So they label themselves, and and when you label yourself with limiting labels, you're defeated from the very beginning. But if you look at that mountain and go, okay, this is the mountain, this is where I want to be. So like a lot of times I'll take people in a crowd and I say, okay, close your eyes. And I want you to picture 90-year-old you or 100-year-old you, and you're standing, today's you is standing face to face with 100-old you. And I want you to look at 100-old you, and I want you to picture 100-year-old you. And I want you to see that 100-year-old you smiling, energetic, happy, looking healthy. Picture that person.
Vigorous.
Vigorous. Now, what would 100-year-old you tell today's you? And that's a very important conversation to have. And then once you see what you can be, get a picture of what you want to be, then you start with, okay, what's the next baby step I can take? I've been taking baby steps for 24 years. I didn't know that's what I was doing, but basically that's what I've been doing. Now, every once in a while, I'll take a giant step, but most of the time, it's like, oh, don't eat the packaged baby carrots. Oh, okay, I'll stop doing that. I heard, about sardines, how good sardines were. So I'm going to start eating sardines. So I did a thing. This was sort of a bigger jump. Okay. I was like, all right, I'm going to eat sardines for 30 days in a row because they're disgusting. They smell disgusting. They taste disgusting. I'm going to eat sardines 30 days in a row. And because jumping the discipline to habit barrier. And so after about 3 days, I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. Then I took sauerkraut and put them in sauerkraut. It's one of my favorite meals now after 30 days. And so I conditioned myself. And I think we condition ourselves and, just go to God and say, God, I know you want me to be a healthiest version of me that I can be. And take him by the hand. And then in your other hand, you take community by the hand. Who do you know? Who do you know that can walk this with you? When I started 24 years ago, I told Cindy, I can't do it by myself. I need you to help me. She didn't need it. She was healthy. But I was like, I need you to go with me. I need you to do this journey with me. And I said, God, I need to make a lifestyle change. And I can't do it. I need you to help me do that. But I saw at that point, I want to die young at an old age. I want to be the dancing, happy couple on that cruise ship, and then taking community by the hand, people that will do it with you. And nowadays, Miles, it's my whole family. My whole family does this. And it's incredible to see my kids doing this. And so whenever all the kids come over to our house to eat, or when we go to their house to eat, guess what we're having? Whole Foods. There's no battle. There's none of that. And now when I go to Cindy's parents' house, then I pack my own food because they're still on the other journey.
Once again, you got to plan ahead. Don't let the environment control you. You control the environment.
Yeah, exactly. And so, somebody wants to lose the weight, you can do it. You can do it. You may have more obstacles to overcome, but test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. But here's one of the biggest factors I've discovered. We blame a lot of things, obesity, the cause of obesity, a lot of things. But I think one of the causes of obesity is peer pressure. Think about it. You go out to eat with a group of friends. You've been on 3 days. You've been eating healthy. You've been eating healthy. You're doing so good. You go out with a group of friends. You order a salad. You're sitting there. You're eating your salad. And they go, you aren't going to get dessert? Oh, come on. You got to get dessert. Oh, you got to taste this fried, whatever it is. And you feel like you're letting them down, and the peer pressure causes you to say yes. And so you drop your convictions for the convenience of pleasing your friends.
It's easier if you just call it food porn.
Yeah. They're holding up the food porn in front of me.
Yeah. And when also, when you're talking to that 90 or 100-year-old you, think of how much that 90 or 100-year-old you who has stayed healthy has been able to help others. Not just through example, but just by physical ability. and failing to take that seriously is kind of robbing your family and your friends and so on of a resource, because you never know when we're going to need to be that resource for them or want them to be that resource for us. Because, God is still sovereign. I might still have a heart attack or get pancreatic cancer or something. I don't have any guarantees, but I can change the odds. And I can keep from having a problem that I don't want to have a problem I asked for.
That's why I look at Moses and go, I want to be like Moses, 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not weak. His strength was not gone. God retired Moses because he completed his mission. His life mission was complete. He did not retire Moses because he was tired, worn out, and just done.
Right.
This might be our final point if you have time for it. And that is, a lot of what you've mentioned addresses the issue of purpose. When we attack life with purpose, which is certainly the biblical message, it is also in our research, we see that people who have purpose have a lot less dementia, even if they have markers for dementia. And so yourself, the examples of the older guys you mentioned, the thinking about yourself at 90 and 100, those are all reflect a life that intends to be purposeful. And so that's just such a gift we're going to give our brains. And if only we could help people realize that. But one of the ways we can do it is by being good examples of it. So I don't know is there anything, as we wrap up, is there anything else that you wanted to mention? I really thank you for your time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think a good one to end on as well, is having that purpose, that life mission. When I was 21 years old, I was sitting in a church service, and I was listening to this guy teach, and I thought, I want to do what he does the way he does it. And I couldn't get off my mind. And so I was 21 years old. I left church that morning, and I sat down and I wrote my first life mission statement. I used that life mission statement for about eight to 10 years. And then I rewrote another one when I was around, 30. And I rewrote another one. They were all very similar, but I rewrote another one when I was 50, and still, living that out. And in my book, Leading Yourself, chapter 1 is how to live on mission. And that whole chapter is dedicated to how to write a life mission statement. And it's taking your strengths, your passion, and the desired outcome that you feel like the impact that you feel like God wants you to make. You put those three overlapping factors together, you're going to find your life mission. And so I put in there that little equation and some sample life mission statements. So because I see that people struggle identifying their mission, struggling to identify their calling, struggle to identify their purpose. So I just put a little equation together, gave about 8 examples that people can look at and go, oh, I see how this works. You just take, what are your strengths? What is your passion? What desired outcome do you feel like God wants you to make? Mesh those together, and you will begin to find a life mission that will drive you. And I tell my kids all the time, hey, y'all, I'm 64. I'm ahead of you. I've got less time on the runway now than I did before. And I tell you what, I wish I had more than one life to give to Christ, because there's nothing like serving Jesus and serving his kingdom. And you serve faithfully, you serve consistently. It brings joy, it brings fulfillment, it brings contentment. And it's just like, and God continues to grow you through all that. It's like, I want to do more for him. I want to do more for him. He's been so faithful to me and so loving to me. I want to do more for him. And there are times I wish I had more than one lifetime to give. And so but we don't. So we got to use this one lifetime we have.
Only one life will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. Yeah.